All right, guys, welcome into another episode of AL.com Recruiting. I'm your host, Simone Eli, alongside Ben Thomas with AL.com, covering high school sports throughout the entire state. Behind the scenes, Patrick Greenfield producing the show. Switching things up a little bit this week because we've seen so many commitments, Ben. We kind of knew with the holiday coming up, the 4th of July, everyone wanted to be a part of the fireworks, whether it was like a social media announcement, but they wanted to make their commitments. We saw that really throughout the state in a bunch of different sports, Ben, but it's been a pretty busy week.
Yeah, I mean, I feel afraid to leave my social media, Simone. Every time I turn it on, there's somebody else committing. But we kind of expected that. We knew ahead of time there was going to be some big 4th of July commitments.
Yeah.
And there were, obviously. And, we've talked about July being a big month just overall for commitments. And that's been the case so far. And we're, only 7 days in so far. So it's going to be a big month. And a lot of big chips are falling, in Alabama.
Yeah, if we take a look at the in-state commitments graphic that Patrick put up for us, a lot of guys making their decision. And Ben, one of the biggest for Alabama, at least, was that Antonio Kite commitment, the Anniston 4-star defensive back, and making his decision. I didn't really realize that he was set to make a decision, and then I feel like it kind of popped up.
Yeah, me too. I mean, he kind of came on late, but obviously super athlete out of Anniston High School. The number 13 player in the state, defensive back, 6'2", 180, 6 interceptions last year for Anniston. A lot of people know this guy, Simone, from his basketball days. He helped Anniston to the state basketball championship last year and was the 4A basketball player of the year. So really athletic guy out of Anniston, joining the Nick Saban class. Of course, obviously famous for the defensive backs they've had at Alabama, and this is another guy that fits that mold. I talked to him actually last Friday, and he, I was trying to get him to give me his finalist, and I said, who are your finalists? And he said Alabama. So I really don't think it was close at all. It was the Crimson Tide all the way for him, and looks like they're getting a good one.
Yeah, another thing that he said, we had some interviews from him on Channel 5 down here in Mobile, and he had said that Nick Saban, seeing him in person was just like a huge thing to him, that he was almost like starstruck almost as a high school athlete to be recruited by Nick Saban, to meet Nick Saban, and to now be joining that program. So obviously, Coach having a huge impact on him. And I really think that's the case for a lot of in-state players, Ben, is, especially these younger guys. I mean, all they've really ever known is Nick Saban at Alabama. They were not even a part of obviously Saban's only been there for a part of their lives, but the majority of their lives where they've watched college football, Nick Saban has been the head coach at Alabama. So these guys are like starstruck when they lay eyes on him.
Yeah, that is weird to think. I mean, I haven't thought about that much, but they don't. These guys don't remember the Mike Shula era and those type things in Alabama football. But interesting thing about Antonio is he told me that he doesn't. He probably could play some basketball at Alabama if he wanted to. Nate Oates might want him on the team. He said that's not an option right now. He's going to focus on football, but he is going to stay. He told me and play basketball for Anniston, and as they try and defend their state basketball title next year. So. Not a guy who right now is going to graduate early, but good pickup for Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide.
I have a lot of respect for that. I know a lot of guys, not that I'm saying that guys that do leave early is a bad thing, but guys who want to finish out their career, be the dual sport athletes that they are, and go and potentially win a state title there at Anniston. Speaking of dual sport athletes, Riley Quick, the little brother, of course, who has a brother on the current Alabama team, decides he's going to go with baseball instead of football, the Hewitt-Trussville standout. And we talked about him earlier this year on the show, Ben, a guy who is an offensive lineman, but also a standout pitcher, something you don't really see very often. He's going to play baseball for Brad Bohannon.
Yeah, really I think we talked about it, and it is really one of the more interesting storylines of this recruiting season. Riley Quick, who's a top 10 talent, football-wise, offensive lineman for Hewitt-Trussville, but also was the Class 7A pitcher of the year for the Huskies. Went, I think, 9-2 with 2 saves. Was just a great player there with our Birmingham AL.com co-player of the year. And he decides to play baseball. I think it was trending that way. It's just, as we talked about, I think, before on the show, that's a hard combination to be. I mean, you can play baseball and football in college, but when you're an offensive lineman in the SEC, they're going to want you to be upwards of 300 or over. And when you're a pitcher, that, in baseball, that doesn't translate very easily, and you can't fluctuate like that. So I think he was going to have to pick a sport, I think. and it seemed like it was trending toward baseball. And this is a guy, Simone, who could even be drafted next summer. I mean, he may not even get to Alabama, but he, his brother, as you mentioned, Pierce, is on the offensive line at Alabama. They're an Alabama family. He loved Alabama. He talked about that and how much he loves Alabama. So it just seems like a natural fit for him.
So we're going to continue to talk about Alabama here in just a little bit. We'll get to Jeremiah Alexander just a couple minutes, guys. A guy who is big on Alabama. Alabama big on him. He's the biggest recruit in the state. But first, let's talk about Alex McPherson, the Auburn commit, the kicker, one of the best in the country, Ben. That decision came out just the other day. We have Cornelius Ricks on Facebook right now asking about who Auburn is high on. And here you go. Kickers have always been good at Auburn, and it looks like that trend is going to continue.
Yeah, I mean, following, in place of the Carlson kickers, he looks to be the next great Auburn kicker. This is guy is the top-rated kicker in the nation, according to most people. Out of Fort Payne, he commits to Auburn on Tuesday night. So a big get for the Tigers. If you look at their other guys they're looking at, Caden Story, the younger brother Christian Story, who's also an Alabama player, just like the Quicks, is supposed to decide on August 1st. A lot of people think Auburn is kind of the leader for him, Caden Story out of Lynette. So be on the lookout for him. And I think Auburn may kind of be getting on a kind of a swing here in the next couple of weeks. We'll see.
Yeah, for sure. All right, switching gears a little bit back to commits that we've seen this week. Conner Harrell, the Thompson quarterback standout entering his senior season, decided on North Carolina. I'm looking at Evan Smith, of course, the Oak Mountain quarterback. Conner Harrell going to North Carolina. Thoughts on that, Ben?
Well, interesting you said Northwestern because Northwestern was one of his finalists.
That's actually what was in my mind. And then Evan Smith made that decision like the day before, right?
Yeah. So Conner Harrell goes to North Carolina. Interesting, I'm working on a story for AL.com about just it seems like in the last few years, since 2019, we've had a lot of high-profile in-state quarterbacks go out of state. And this is the latest one. Of course, we got a bunch in this class going out of state. But Conner Harrell, this is a good fit for him. Obviously, I think he had 42 touchdown passes and 3 interceptions for Thompson last year. He's back for his senior year this year. We're going to see some highlights of him here. But North Carolina is a good fit for him. Mark Freeman said he really liked the fit, that they do a lot of the same stuff offensively that they do at Thompson. So he thinks it'll be a comfort level there with Conner. And this is a good player. I mean, I hate to see him leave out of state, but, Auburn and Alabama both have their quarterback commits for this class. We talked about it last week with John Garcia Jr., Ty Simpson going to Alabama out of Tennessee, and, of course, Holden Garner going to Auburn out of Georgia. So Conner, I think, will be good for North Carolina in that offense. And, obviously, we talked about Zach Pyron from Pinson Valley, who's committed to Baylor. Caleb Johnson from Clay Chalkville going to Louisville, and Tanner Bailey from Gordo going to Oregon. So all 4 of those top 20 players in the state this year, Simone, in this class of 2022, heading out of state.
Yeah, Ben, and we'll get to your top 25 that you released yesterday in just a minute. But one thing about Harrell, he was injured in the state championship game, but I feel like there's been no drop-off because the guy has really dominated 7-on-7s, picked right back up this offseason, now going into the fall. Switching gears now to Evan Smith, the dual threat guy over at Oak Mountain. And boy, is he fun to watch. When I was up there in Birmingham getting to cover this kid, just a fantastic athlete, headed to Northwestern. An impressive school for an impressive player.
Yeah, I mean, you've obviously seen him more than I have, Simone, being up there in Birmingham, but I've heard a lot of good things about Evan. And Northwestern's interesting is coming down here in the state, and they're getting some guys. I've heard a lot of great things about the facilities up there. I've never been there, but the facilities up there are second to none, I think. Just last week, Braden Turner from McGill-Tulane, a cornerback, committed to Northwestern. And last year, his former teammate Jordan Mosley signed with Northwestern. So Pat Fitzgerald kind of getting into the state of Alabama a little bit. I think Evan, obviously, we got him listed as a quarterback. He's probably not going to be a quarterback in college primarily. He'll probably be more of a receiver, defensive back. But I think a good player, a good guy, and a good get for Northwestern.
We'll get back to these recent commitments in just a minute, but want to talk about the big decision that everyone is really waiting to hear, especially Alabama fans. But what is Jeremiah Alexander going to do? He's expected to commit tomorrow. Ben, I know you talked to him this morning. What have you heard?
Yeah, I mean, we'll know on Thursday. I mean, it's interesting, Simone. I talked to him actually last week at the Foley 7-on-7 event, and he said, everything's up in the air. I don't know when I'm going to commit. And then like 2 days later, he said, "Oh, I'm committing next Thursday on my mom's birthday." So, it's Alabama, Georgia, it's Clemson. He visited UCF. I think it'd shock the world if he ended up going to UCF. No offense, Gus Malzahn. We still want you to come on the show with us. I think it's probably Alabama or Clemson for what I hear. And I thought all along that he would rejoin the Alabama recruiting class. I still think that's what's going to happen. Yeah. He decommitted last fall, which was strange, but he's a young guy, probably wanted to go on visits and all that type thing. But he didn't tell me what he's going to do, but he's I think about 4:30 on Thursday is when he's going to drop a commitment video, and I'd be surprised if it's not Alabama. I expect him to rejoin that Alabama class, even though he's got a lot of great options, obviously.
Yeah. Another guy from Thompson who has Alabama on the list is Justice Finkley. Seems like the Warriors are just loaded with talent. And again, we'll get to your top 25 in a minute, but I know they have a lot of Thompson players on their Ben. But Justice Finkley names his top 3 in Alabama included in that.
Yeah, Justice actually goes to Hewitt-Trussville. They're easy to get them confused because they're in the same region there. But,
oh, Lord in heaven. I'm sorry. 2 red teams.
Josh Floyd is calling me right now. This can't be good. No, I'm just kidding.
No doubt.
Justice is the guy, we've had him on the show. He is the interesting case because he is the guy that wants to be a surgeon, has talked outwardly about wanting to be a surgeon, go to medical school afterwards. But he names his top 3, Alabama, Texas, Colorado. 2 surprises there, Simone. Number 1, Colorado. He did visit them, so I guess it's not a shock. But Alabama, Texas, obviously powers. Not difficult to see them there. But a lot of people had him going to Michigan. And he did not include Michigan on his top 3. So I would think Alabama and Texas there, but, obviously Colorado's in his thought process or he wouldn't have put him on the list.
Yeah, so Hewitt-Trussville, defensive lineman Justice Finkley. I want to make sure that I get that right. But, Ben, when we look at your top 25 that you released yesterday, a lot of in-state guys for both the 22 and 23 class on that list. And I am not wrong when I said there are a lot of Thompson players on that list.
You're right. Yeah, what we did for AL.com was a top 25 players, top overall recruits, sophomores through seniors. So in other words, you could be class of 22, 23, or 24 here. And yeah, 3 of the top 4 were Thompson guys. You can go on AL.com and check that out. I hope you will. Obviously, the number 1 guy is the guy we just talked about, the guy who's going to commit tomorrow, Jeremiah Alexander. He's been the number 1 player in our state for some time. And we'll find out tomorrow where he's going to go. But right behind him was Peter Woods, Simone, who's the 2023 guy, as I get my years confused, for Thompson. And then James Smith, we talked about him recently, that he's out of Carver, Montgomery. He's a beast as well on the defensive line. So 3 straight defensive linemen at the top there. And then Tony Mitchell, the defensive back out of Thompson, is also highly recruited. Interestingly, on the list there, just the top 10 guys, you can see only 3 right now committed. Emmanuel Henderson, who I think we talked about on our very first Gold Standard AL.com recruiting show here. The running back out of Geneva County is going to Alabama. Shamar James, recently committed to Florida out of Faith Academy. And then Robert Woodyard out of Williamson, who's been committed to Alabama for more than a year now. And really been one of the quietest commitments we've had. I mean, you don't hear a lot from Robert. He's not big on social media. I have seen him at a couple of 7-on-7s. He still seems content to go to Alabama, but he's just, I don't want to say strange, but just a quiet recruitment. He's just not one to be on social media or be out there a lot.
Rare nowadays.
Yeah.
That's rare. We don't see guys who don't want the spotlight when they're making their decision. Of course, they've earned that spotlight, no doubt. But going back to those in-state commitments, Ben, I want to get to a couple other guys that we haven't hit on quite yet. I know that there's some down here in the Mobile area who made their decision, the UAB commitment there out of Spanish Fort.
Yeah, I mean, UAB's kind of got, speaking of pipelines, UAB's kind of got a pipeline to Spanish Fort. Carl Fauntroy is a good player, also a dual sport guy. Played starting point guard for the basketball team that played in the Class 6A final against Mountain Brook this year. But good defensive back, and he'll go to UAB and play with Bill Clark. You know, they got, much like we have down here at South Alabama, Simone, with the new stadium, Hancock-Whitney. Obviously, they have the new stadium at UAB that'll be ready for the fall, and I think that'll be a big attraction for them as they move forward. But Spanish Fort's been a popular place for them. Obviously, they got the Johnston boys, Tyler Johnston, Thomas Johnston, Hayden Pittman, Matthew Quinn, the kickers out of Spanish Fort. So obviously a great Spanish tradition, football tradition at Spanish Fort, and Bill Clark not afraid to come down here and get a couple of those guys.
Yeah. So there's your list of the recent commitments, all really within the last couple of days, it seems like. But the big one coming tomorrow, Jeremiah Alexander, the #1 recruit in the state of Alabama, the one-time Tide commit, set to make his decision. Ben thinks sometime around 4:30 tomorrow. He's planning on releasing a video. And Ben, if it is Alabama, I think these Tide fans are going to be pretty fired up.
Yeah, 1 second, Patrick, if you could throw that list back up there before we get back to Jeremiah. I wanted to mention, you see the guy from Calera, Kobe Prentice there,
yeah.
Simone, who just committed to Maryland last week, but I understand that Alabama is now coming in on him as well. So don't be surprised if you might see a switch there at some point. A really fast guy out of Calera, Kobe Prentice. Just heads up on that in case something like that happens. But, yeah, Jeremiah, if Alabama obviously is starting to kind of load up again, if they get him back in the fold, that'll be a big get for Nick Saban and the group. And kind of, that's kind of what we've all been waiting for, is when Jeremiah is going to commit. And the interesting thing is, he had said for a while that he wasn't going to commit till the All-Star game, which is in December or January. But obviously, but I think some of these kids, now that they've gotten back out, Simone, now that recruiting's back open, they've been to places, and now they're getting to commit. And I'm glad they had a chance to go places and see different places before they commit.
Yes, I think that players are as happy as college coaches, because I've spoke to a couple of college coaches who are also happy that they can actually lay eyes on these guys, have conversation with these players, get to know them, now that the NCAA has kind of lifted the recruiting rules and guys can go on campus. But we will have more on Jeremiah Alexander tomorrow on our social media pages. Be sure to follow Ben Thomas. I'm Simone Eli, Patrick Greenfield behind the scenes. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of AL.com Recruiting. We'll have much more next week, and definitely recap Jeremiah Alexander's decision after we talk to him tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.